Mahalo. First of all, can I have your name and a website that you can get located on?
Absolutely. Michael J. Murphy of Why in the World Are They Spraying? And our website for the film to learn more about getting involved with the movement is whyintheworldaretheyspraying.com.
Mahalo. Now, I understand that you're over here down Chinatown on Oahu on the 3rd of January. December. Wow, I'm a month ahead. Hello. December. And where are we at, and what do you have premiering here, showing here?
We're premiering the second film that we've done on the chemtrail geoengineering issue, and that's called Why in the World Are They Spraying? And it's a closer look into one of the many agendas associated with these programs, and that's weather control. By putting aerosols into our sky enables certain corporations to control the weather. So that's a big part of the objectives of these programs, and it's a very effective way to consolidate an enormous amount of both monetary and political power into the hands of a few. Unfortunately, it's at the expense of every living thing on the planet.
Do you know some of the things that are in those aerosol clouds or sprays?
Absolutely, yeah. There are many different things, but the primary ingredients in geoengineering programs are oxides of metal, aluminum, barium, and strontium. Interestingly enough, we've had tests here from Maui, about 30 tests that revealed the metals, the primary ingredients in geoengineering programs, in very high quantities. And we've also had people now, after the release of our films, tests from around the world, and again, people from around the world are finding this footprint. It's very toxic to both human health and ecology, and we've seen profound changes, not only here in Maui, but all across the world.
Do you know, I understand that they have a plain sight, a place where they have in Arizona, I believe it is, where they keep a lot of the...
Well, a lot of people believe it's Evergreen Air. Evergreen Air used to be Air America, which is the CIA front company. That's one of the things that we're going to move forward in doing. We're going to investigate who specifically is doing this. So there's a lot of speculation, but
you got to know that it's got to be done with the military itself, because they ain't going to allow nobody in the skies.
Sure, yeah. We believe it's military involvement, but again, we're going to connect these dots. We're going to look specifically at who's doing it and provide that information in a very, very effective way. And again, we're not going to speculate. We're going to get into proof.
Do you know what these metals have on the effect of the body? I know I have some kind of information. Could you help to enlighten some of the people that are watching?
Yeah, aluminum being the primary ingredient, we're again finding in rain tests around the world, and blood tests from people who have been testing their blood have been finding very high quantities. Aluminum is very toxic. Aluminum creates many neurological disorders, which we've seen a great increase in aluminum-related illnesses, one of which many people are familiar with is Alzheimer's. We've had over 260% increase in Riverside County of Alzheimer's alone. We continue to see these increases all around the world where these programs have been deployed. Barium, which is being found in very high quantities as well, has many different abilities in terms of what it can do in our atmosphere, has been showing up in blood tests as well. Barium lowers our immune system, and it also raises our blood pressure. So I've spoken to a number of emergency room physicians who've been aware of this. By depleting our immune system, it will lead to a number of other illnesses, but they're also seeing an increase on heavy spray days of heart attacks and strokes due to the fact that it raises our blood.
Also, a lot of people who have asthma or some kind of breathing disorders too are highly affected during these heavy spraying days, correct?
Right. Respiratory mortality went from number 8 down to number 3 in just a 6-year period. So we're seeing all kinds of illnesses. And again, these are very toxic. Strontium is actually a carcinogen. So we're breathing this in every breath that we take, because gravity takes effect. It gets into the air that we breathe. So yeah, we've seen profound changes in these health issues.
And this is not just happening here in Hawaii, but I believe this is a global issue that's been happening all over the world, especially like in U.S. controlled nations, NATO.
It's happening in all NATO countries, but not limited. We're literally seeing these around the world. There are only a couple countries that have not reported it, and that may have changed. Again, geoengineers, going back to their models, they want to put this aerosol, this toxic aerosol, around every part of the planet, and they state these programs are to mitigate global warming. By putting aluminum, it reflects sun. What we found contradicts that. We found
Disneyland spin.
yeah, no, right. NASA studies, other university studies that indicate putting aerosols into our sky will regionally reduce the temperature. But at night, those aerosols act as a blanket. They trap heat. We've seen a great increase in nighttime highs. So according to what we have looked at in the studies, we believe it has to do right now with the methane release and the ice melting in the polar regions. So it's a big concern of ours that they have actually triggered this problem that they claim that they're trying to protect. But again, it comes down to corporatization of every natural system. And when you corporatize these things, you can literally, through weather control every political system and every food supply. And that's, again, a very effective way to consolidate power.
Does Monsanto have a big hand in this?
Monsanto benefits from it. There's no question in that. What we're finding, we interviewed a couple of farmers here in Hawaii on Maui, and it's across the board. Farmers are seeing a reduction in their crops due to this issue called abiotic stress. What is abiotic stress? It's everything that the chemtrail geoengineering programs create. It's drought conditions. It's too much moisture because we'll get droughts in certain areas, flooding in others. It's heavy metal contamination. Our soils are being contaminated, and it's also fungal overgrowth. And due to the fact that these programs block our sun, we now have an overgrowth of fungus. Monsanto has a genetically modified seed that addresses abiotic stress. And it's the seed's available in everything from apples to zucchini. So getting back to the farmers that we interviewed, they've seen between a 60 and 70% decline in their ability to get natural organic yields. And the concern is that if this continues, if we allow this to happen, we will lose our ability to grow natural organic foods and be dependent on the Monsanto and other genetically modified seed companies' food supply. So it's a very important issue, not only because of the health implications, but the ecosystem, which are collapsing now around the world.
Do you understand Monsanto's footprint in Hawaii?
I'm very aware of Monsanto's footprint in Hawaii and the market share that they have. Yes.
We're the #1 seed exporter for Monsanto around the world.
Unfortunately, that rings true to me, and I'm aware of the health concerns and also the ecological concerns of genetically modified seeds. And in why in the world are they spraying? We made that link, how Monsanto benefits. The next film, which should be done within a year and a half, is going to be who in the world is spraying. That will be our third film, where we're going to dig in, we're going to see if there's any funding and direct relations. But an important relation to genetically modified seeds, Bill Gates is on the public record.
He's got the seed bank.
Well, he does have the seed bank.
And he gave how much? Millions of dollars in share to Monsanto.
And he's also funding geoengineering. So by funding geoengineering, he's destroying crops and our ability to grow natural organic foods, but he benefits also on the back end with the market share that Monsanto gains from that destruction. And we could go on all night and all night about the connections involved with this, but they definitely benefit, there's no question.
So would you consider that by us breathing this air, we're actually being geoengineered ourselves because of all these heavy metals and chemicals that are going in there?
Yeah, it's definitely compromising our health, and I believe that there's a component to that, to us changing, and it is, it is changing. It's changing our immune system, it's changing many things, and perhaps we'll be able to look into that a little more closely, because I think the story goes a lot deeper. I think there's a lot more to look at.
Okay, again, your name?
Name is Michael J. Murphy. I'm the producer and director of 2 groundbreaking films, What in the World Are They Spraying? In our latest, which has won several awards, Why in the World Are They Spraying? You can find more information and see the movie trailer at whyintheworldaretheyspraying.com.
Mahalo. I appreciate you taking your time and getting out the truth, because it needs to be known. People need to wake up and look up.
We need to wake up and look up, and I want to thank everybody here in Hawaii, not only for what you have done to address this, but getting active by learning about it and spreading this message to people. So my message to you again is mahalo and keep looking up.
Cool.
Let's say we were doing geoengineering because we wanted to make the weather a little bit better.
There will be monsoon failures during that period, there'll be huge hurricanes. The global studies indicate there will be some impact on precipitation patterns.
Might involve large-scale regional agricultural disruption lasting a number of years.
Potentially 2 billion people could have their food disrupted by such interventions.
That the aerosols can, at least in these model simulations or indicated by these simulations, can offset most climate change in most places most of the time for both precipitation and runoff, but it's likely to cause some damage in some places.
When I grow up, I want to be either an artist or a teacher. I want to grow up in a world where there's lots of nature. I love nature.
How can I look my children in the eyes and not try to shed the light on this issue, knowing every breath they take is laden with these metals? I have been forced to conclude that there is no greater or no more immediate threat to anything that lives and breathes than the global geoengineering programs short of nuclear catastrophe.
Geoengineering is defined as the artificial modification of the Earth's climate. Geoengineers are proposing spraying 10 to 20 million tons of toxic aluminum and other substances into our sky for the stated goal of cooling our planet.
So let me distinguish these two different kinds of geoengineering as clearly as I can. So the first one is we call solar radiation management, and that's the idea that you could put mostly reflective particles or other means to make the Earth whiter, effectively to increase the Earth's reflectivity, reducing the amount of heat that's absorbed by the sun, and therefore exerting some overall cooling tendency on the Earth.
I think, though the initial results of climate models indicate that reflection of sunlight away from the Earth can offset most climate change in most places most of the time. But it will damage some places.
We've mostly thought about sulfur, and nevertheless, there might be some good reasons to think about aluminum. It turns out, first of all, there's been a lot of work on the environmental consequences of aluminum in the stratosphere. There's a bunch of papers going back to the 70s that look at the radiative and ozone-destroying properties of aluminum in the stratosphere, and those make you think it might be useful. Do this in just a jet in a very simple way. Make high-quality alumina particles just by spraying aluminum vapor out, which oxidizes. So it's certainly, in principle, possible to do that.
Since we released What in the World Are They Spraying?, hundreds of people from around the world have began taking rain tests. What they're finding is what many are calling the chemtrail geoengineering footprint of aluminum, barium, and strontium.
So we're finding this well-sought footprint internationally, all over the world, wherever they take samples and get a chemical analysis of rain and snow water. This is quite common. Wherever you see the jet chemtrails go over, you're going to get aluminum, barium, strontium coming down on you.
Why would we not believe it's happening when what we see in the sky matches exactly the expressed goal of numerous geoengineering patents, about 160 or more? Why would we not believe this is happening when every element showing up in the rain tests are the primary elements named in those geoengineering patents? Why would we not believe this is happening when we have escalating levels in very short time frames, as short as 5 years? We see rain levels of aluminum, for example, escalating as much as 50,000%. California air quality studies do not show these metals migrating from China. And It's of recent origin, so this bombardment of heavy metals that's raining down on us is coming from somewhere. Why would we not believe geoengineering is occurring when the weather patterns are so altered here in exactly the manner stated by geoengineers and reports on the consequences for geoengineering, which are diminished rainfall, which are increased ozone destruction. We have a massive ozone hole in the northern hemisphere now.
Should aluminum be in the soil in the rain? And yes, it should be in the soil. It's naturally there, always was there. And should it be in the rain? Well, absolutely not. But the standard reply has been your samples are contaminated. But since we are getting samples now that show zero aluminum, and we're getting lots of barium and strontium and zero aluminum, so that just proves that if there was dirt in our samples of some sort, dust blown up from the ground, we should get some aluminum in some detectable quantity.
The primary ingredients in geoengineering are specifically the oxides of metals, including aluminum oxide. This is devastating to plants, totally devastating. The trees are dying. Why? Approximately 2 years ago, I rode in the back, and you can ride in the back of my place for miles. You can go all the way through the woods, creeks and everything, and it was, I say was, gorgeous. And the day before yesterday, I took a ride, and I rode in the back, and what I found was total devastation.
As I pointed out before, Michael, we're seeing, as in this example here, very hardy native plants completely flash out dead. That looks like it's been hit with some kind of a chemical. And we've only seen this in the last couple of years. And there's another one there, back over there. We're seeing mature madrone trees, which are 70, 80 feet high, flash out dead, just like this. USDA refuses to investigate it.
The pH typically around here should be about 5.6. Well, since the contrailing got heavy, I watched the pH here in these forests, go up, I guess would be the word. From 5.6, it went about 20 times more alkaline.
Very big red flag of fallout from these materials are pH changes to the forest floor. We have very extensive studies from the U.S. Department of Agriculture on the soils in our region, and those soils have changed in 5 to 6 years. The pHs have changed in this area as much as 10 to 12 times toward alkaline in 5 to 6 years. I've personally been in the forest testing with USDA soil scientists who just scratched their heads and seem to have no explanation for incredibly profound changes in pH, which is affecting the ecosystem here tremendously.
Aluminum buffer action, aluminum hydroxide is what we think it is, plus the barium carbonate, strontium titanate, strontium oxides, barium oxides, probably some aluminum oxides in there, that this has apparently driven our acid soils about 20 times more alkaline to about 6.8.
There are simply too many dots here that connect. Our skies are almost never blue anymore. That is a named consequence of geoengineering. The amount of lost sunshine hitting the planet right now is beyond belief. If people look up the term global dimming, they will see that fully 20% of the sun's rays that reached the planet several decades ago are no longer reaching the planet. I mean, that's a profound change that few people even know is occurring. And you have very visible occurrences in the sky from the aircraft, a very visible sun-blocking, expanding, dingy trails that are exactly what geoengineering patents describe.
Heavy aluminum, I'm talking like in the 40s and 50s up to 3, 4, 5,000. That's still common. Barium, strontium to somewhere 40 or 50 to, again, about 2,000 or 3,000. Same for both barium and strontium.
Where is this mountain of metal coming from? Why is asthma, ADD, Alzheimer's, autism, all elements related in many studies to aluminum or particulate inhalation? Why are these ailments going off the charts with no apparent explanation? Why has respiratory mortality in the continental United States gone from 8th on the list to 3rd in 6 years? And no one seems to ask any questions. Why every other person has asthma now? Why every other commercial on TV is an allergy medication? And again, when David Keith, the world's most recognized geoengineer, was asked on the record, had there been any studies done as to the consequences of dumping 20 million tons of aluminum in the atmosphere, his answer was patently no.
While geoengineers claim that their models are to cool the planet, a number of studies now are arising that indicate, yes, temporarily there will be regionally cooling as these particulates reflect the sun. However, they actually at night act as a blanket and will warm the planet. So the question now remains, why in the world are they spraying?
One of the things that geoengineering is about when you're environmentally doing something with the atmosphere is that you can be engaged in weather modification. Historically, weather modification in the United States began to be looked upon in the 1940s as something that people would want to do. And so they started looking at making it enhancing snow, enhancing rain. They started looking at hurricane control. There was a whole bunch of projects in the 40s that started. One was Project Storm Fury, which turned into a disaster when they tried to modify a hurricane.
I'm Mark McCandlish. And for the better part of 30 years, I worked in the aerospace and defense industry. I had a secret clearance twice during my career. Some of the technology that I saw or participated in the creation of tends to play a role in some of the things that are used to control the weather. The very distribution process is being employed in the aerosol campaign, manipulating the weather, crops, taking over the food production or controlling the food production, the military applications. The process evolved when they realized in the 1800s that you can put things into the environment that will influence the uptake of moisture and where it drops out of the atmosphere again.
My name is Scott Stevens. I was a television weatherman for 20 years. These chemtrails are absolutely required to impact whatever weather event they were designing. And the trails were an absolute necessary ingredient for them to achieve their weather modification goals. So we're finding the aerosols, the metal particulates, all of those can be used and leveraged to create weather events that are several standard deviations or outside what would be typically normal. When the geoengineering really got underway with the Russians in the mid-70s, we ended up with snow in Miami. We ended up with frost deep into Mexico. The bizarreness of the weather really exploded on the scene when weather engineering got going in the mid-70s.
The Dakotas, in winter, they recorded a temperature of almost 100 degrees, 94 degrees. It broke the former record by 32 degrees. There's very profound things that people don't notice. Blue skies almost never. We almost never have dew on the ground. That's a known consequence of geoengineering if they did it, which they appear to be. It sucks the moisture out of the atmosphere. It doesn't descend, doesn't form dew. We have massive temperature disruptions. People are starting to wonder, why is it 80 degrees one day and then snowing the next day at 50 degrees or 45 degrees and then back up to 80 the day after that? When you push and pull the climate with these manipulation programs, of which there's a mountain of data to corroborate their existence, then you start to have massive fluctuations in the system. And we saw in March in the continental U.S., there were 15,232 temperature records broken. That's profound. Some of the daytime highs, the former records were broken by as much as 32 degrees. Don't people wonder what in the world is going on?
Whether they want to make it snow at 45, 46, 47 degrees. I remember when 38, 39 was a big deal. Those kind of snowfalls in the upper 30s. And now that's been pushed into the 40s.
There's a patent called ice nucleation for weather modification. This is a patent from NASA. It can be found online in its full form. This patent is for the creation of artificial snowstorms from what would have been rainstorms. However preposterous this sounds to people, if they look up Chinese create snowstorms, they will find a long list of articles where the Chinese Bureau of Weather Modification openly admitted that they were creating snowstorms until they did $1 billion worth of damage in Beijing. So my question would be, if the Chinese can do this, and NASA has a patent for the same purpose, why would we believe snow events here are natural when it's snowing now regularly at 45 degrees, sometimes 50 degrees, heavy, wet, concrete snow that's full of aluminum, full of barium, full of strontium? Consider the ice pack in their first aid kit that can sit dormant at room temperature for decades until the chemicals are mixed together, at which time it creates ice.
As an on-air meteorologist, I had a responsibility to my audience. There were storms that were not behaving as they were modeled or they historically would have responded.
If you can control where moisture is collected and where it's dropped, so to speak, in the form of rain or any other kind of precipitation, then you can really, you can do everything. You can steer the weather system. If you want to be able to manipulate the weather, one of the things we know about the materials that are being used in the aerosols, we've seen everything from aluminum oxide, barium salts, strontium, copper sulfate, potassium iodide, a number of different kinds of things, each of which have different levels of reactivity with the moisture in the air. Some, like aluminum oxide, tends to sequester the moisture. The aluminum oxide nanoparticles, which are microscopically fine and uniform in size, attract the humidity, the moisture in the air, and it basically forms like a nucleation process where the moisture condenses on these particles.
With cloud seeding, the cooling will be achieved by making clouds reflect a bit more sunlight back to space than they would otherwise, and less sunlight reaching the surface would tend to cool the planet. These aerosol particles act as something called cloud condensation nuclei, and these are sites where these particles act as sites where cloud drops can form.
Well, the one thing that we know has happened is because these are nanoparticles and they float like mad with a little bit of moisture added to them, they go over the Continental Divide and they dump all of California's rain into the Mississippi Valley, which is the reason they're having floods and tornadoes and fierce storms and odd weather back east. The effect here in California is drought.
Now then, if you hit that area of the sky with a beam of a particular kind of radiation, and you can heat those particles up, just like heating up, your cup of coffee in the microwave, these particles begin to vibrate and resonate if you use the right frequency of RF energy, that they then heat the surrounding air, and they will take all of that air and the moisture that's in it to a higher altitude where it's much colder, and it'll condense and then become a low pressure system.
Well, there's a couple of locations where they tend to be very interested in leaving their trails. The big one and the surprising one for me is under areas of high pressure, where you would expect to see the blue skies, the dry conditions. Those are prime targets for trailing. A couple of reasons. High pressure is stable. It's relatively still. We've got the clockwise flow around it. And if you accentuate the high, and so it's very easy to add those particulates of aluminum, barium, and whatever else they want to put in there. And as you add heat to that, those particulates then radiate the heat into the atmosphere and it warms. What does a warming atmosphere do? Boom, it expands. And so that's one way. It's a very simple way, but it's very apparent because under the high pressure, it's supposed to be quiet. It's supposed to be still. It's supposed to be blue. And we're not seeing that. Then as the storm approaches, the high begins to recede. And then they're running the flights back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and literally seeding the leading edges of the cirrus. So the cirrus canopy is accentuated. That cirrus canopy, which would maybe be 200-300 miles out ahead of a cold front, is now 450 miles.
Based on geoengineering data, it would appear the Pacific Northwest gets an excessive amount of the fallout from these programs because much of the weather, much of the precipitation and the storm tracks and the jet stream move across us. So as stated by globally recognized geoengineers like David Keith, that's the type of area they would want to seed these particulates as incoming fronts start to cover landfall. And that's exactly what we see here. When there's any kind of incoming front, we see jets everywhere.
The global studies indicate there will be some impact on precipitation patterns, and obviously there's a lot more opportunity for work in that area.
After studying my time-lapse surveillance, one of the reasons I discovered for the trails was that the persistent ones would break, they would misshapen or deform, and other planes would come along and precisely mark off those locations of deformation. And you're not going to get that with a regular fleet, so this had to be one of the primary purposes for chemtrails, in my opinion, was to measure off where we have these discontinuities showing up in the atmosphere. And in doing these actions and discovering those zones where there's different energies in the atmosphere, I think that plays very closely into their weather engineering programs of mark, surveil, and then that data goes into a weather model that they can then use to forecast or, once again, engineer the weather to their designs.
But you can also influence what happens locally with the atmosphere by painting the materials that these aerosols are made of with different kinds of radio frequency or RF energy, radar, microwave, the HARP system.
You know, HARP is an array, a field of antennas, radio frequency antennas. They're 72 feet tall, and they have a cross diapole across the top that's about 60 feet in each direction. 180 of these are in the array today, so you can imagine this field of antennas. What happens is by firing each one, they produce radio frequency energy that normally comes off of an antenna, spreads out rather rapidly. Same principle. Principles in physics would be like a flashlight shining on a wall. You know, you start with a narrow beam, and by the time you hit the wall, you've got a wide beam. The idea with HARP is to get it to focus or concentrate that radio frequency energy so it doesn't spread out, so you can hold it tighter together and then manipulate it in very specific ways. Weather control is a broad topic, so there's lots of ways to control and manipulate weather. HARP is one of them, because you also have private sector companies getting into this business of weather modification. In the case of HARP, do you need, people always ask me, do you need particulates dispersed in the atmosphere to make more effective? You actually don't. Would it make things more possible? Could you enhance certain effects? Probably so. Could you control energy distributions more efficiently? Probably so, because you're putting in conductors, or you're putting in reflectors, you're putting in particulate material.
If you've ever experienced a hailstorm and you've picked up one of the hailstones and you slice it open with a razor blade, you'll see that it's layer upon layer upon layer of ice. Now, hail is usually formed where you have a low pressure system where there's a tremendous updraft of air. When the air gets warmed up by the sunlight ahead of the storm, the air rises, it takes the moisture that's in the air up to a higher altitude where it's much colder. The moisture begins to condense into water droplets, but the updraft is so powerful that the water is carried to extreme altitudes where it freezes. And it begins to fall, and as it falls, it starts to be caught up in the updraft again, so it's circulated up into the air again, and so each time it's lofted up into the atmosphere, more of the moisture that is condensing on the outside of this nuclei of ice begins to form another layer, and each time it's caught back in the updraft, it goes up again and it gets another layer of ice. And so if you have a system like HARP working in conjunction with aerosols, chemtrails that are spraying in the air, you can actually create updrafts that are so powerful that you can have these hailstone circulation patterns going over and over again, where you get hailstones the size of baseballs or even softballs.
Weather has always been a strategic desire to control by the generals, whether it was Napoleon marching towards Moscow, or Hitler in his Russian campaign, or our own Pacific Fleet trying to understand typhoons and use them for our strategic advantage. War and weather are very closely connected. And they've been connected ever since about 1812 or so, maybe earlier than that. Hannibal had to face the snows in the Alps. And so there's a long history of weather and warfare interactions.
Environmental manipulation is like the ultimate method of covert warfare, because you can literally shut down food production. You can create a situation where the people within a country revolt against their own government, and you're invited in to mop up the mess. The issue of owning the weather by 2025, which is a military publication, we've quoted it as far back as, I think, 94, 95 even. But you go back to these earlier reports and you look at sort of what was the objective, and the objective is exactly that: control the battlefield environment. Environmental factors give you an absolute advantage. If you can weaken your adversary before you have to fire the first bullet, maybe you even win the war.
Whether it's incredibly historic sandstorms when we're invading Iraq, or you want to drought out or flood out a dictator that you're not happy with, or obscure a beach when there's a landing, or if you just want to make money on the futures market.
Owning the weather by 2025, using the weather as a force multiplier. And this kind of goes back to what I was saying before about if you can control where a weather system goes and how much or how severe the weather system is, then you can do other things like you may have heard more recently that many of the aircraft that we've been developing are what they call all-weather capable, which means that they can fly in any kind of weather. They can shoot and target the enemy under really nasty weather circumstances. And these are all things that you can use to your advantage if you happen to be controlling the weather also, because you can have a terrible storm front come in and make it difficult, if not impossible, for the enemy to operate on the ground or to fly their aircraft if they don't have aircraft that are as sophisticated as the ones that you have. And so by creating or using the weather as a force multiplier, as the title implies, that you can achieve an advantage over an enemy force that gives you the upper hand.
One of the ideals of the Air Force is to have this all-weather Air Force, or to have their pilots coming back safely and using the weather as a salient against the enemy and clearing out their own airports from, say, from ice fogs or from bad weather. And so if the idea here is that if we can fly and they can't, that's a great military advantage. There was also research studies on hurricanes that the scientists were truly curious about the behavior of hurricanes, but their military patrons were very interested in how to steer them or direct them in certain ways, almost as a guided weapon.
This jet stream that's moving across, and it shoots 50 miles north and then 75 miles east and then drops back south again and then kind of goes on its way. And they attributed that little dog leg in the jet stream in Alaska to swinging storm systems out of central Texas into central Florida, where they deposited a couple of tornadoes in the middle of Orlando that were like really rare to see in that part of the country. And so people remember that event and they remember that situation. But it'd be a good example of a very small change in Alaska in terms of a jet stream and what kind of a lower 48 effect that would have. And that's again where weather modification, small input in one place can have tremendous change and unexpected outcome in another.
You can create weather systems that are so severe they culminate in battlefield denial, where the enemy is not able to use the roads or the bridges or get through the environment because the weather is so severe. And you can use the weather to destroy his crops, deny him a food source, destabilize his population, because people get hungry. When they're hungry, they get angry and nasty and they don't like what's happening. So there are lots of different things that you can do with the materials. It's all how you use them in the environment, how you apply it.
One of the biggest concerns of early cloud seeding, weather control activities by the General Electric Corporation, came from their lawyers who thought that the corporation was totally vulnerable to lawsuits, because if they started to make fair or foul weather, the people down below in Massachusetts or downwind of Schenectady could institute massive lawsuits that could put GE out of business. So the first response to weather control from their in-house lawyers was to shut it down, was to give the project to the military and ask them to do it with the GE lawyers only being the consultants on the project. So they were allowed to suggest and design certain activities, but they weren't allowed to touch anything or throw anything out of the plane.
The United States government during the Vietnam War perfected weather modification techniques, and also they perfected releasing toxic chemicals like Agent Orange over many areas to defoliate land, trees, grasslands, and other areas.
But this is technology that does come up, and it comes up when you see that the technology advanced far enough to where the practicality of utilizing it in the battlefield environment and the temptation by administrations. I mean, the best covert war is using the environment itself against your adversary.
It was a military moment, and it was actually from pretty recent history. And this was the U.S. military thinking that they might be able to control the monsoon over Vietnam during that conflict. And so only a handful of top-level military advisors and the president were informed that they were going to try to make it rain over the Ho Chi Minh Trail and try to have some military advantage by doing this kind of intervention.
When you start talking about manipulating the environment, we have treaties that go back to the mid-70s that forbid this, number one, as weapons of war.
So the perfection of weather modification took place, but it became apparent that using weather modification for wartime purposes was not acceptable to the United States government and other nations of the world. So therefore, the NMOD Treaty came into being and was signed by the United States government after passing Congress. The reason it was signed and implemented was because it would ban warfare, weather modification techniques and use during times of war.
Almost all of our treaties that we've signed, including the non-proliferation, counter-proliferation treaties, chemical treaties, the ones that were signed recently, last few years, back maybe a decade now, I guess time goes. But they had domestic exemptions, and so does the environmental treaty, where you can do whatever you want in your own territorial boundaries. I mean, you start manipulating weather in one part of the planet, it doesn't look on the ground and say, oh yeah, wait, this is the boundary of a political boundary. It fails to recognize those. So you start to talk about geophysics and manipulating the planet itself, then it's a question of those kinds of exemptions shouldn't even be allowed.
Meteorology and the military have a very long history, as I said, and it goes into the strategic advantage that multiplies your traditional force, that is your armament, into using nature to your advantage as well.
They want to create a storm in the southeast, then they'll start engineering out over the North Pacific. That's where the trailies will be, because you want to work out several days ahead of time so you have less input, and you multiply that over a couple of days, you can have a big result in 5 days' time. So small input upstream, big result downstream. And one of the rules is always work with what's coming. Don't try to necessarily work against it. You can kill a storm in place. That's easy to do with HAARP. You just change the polarization, you change the ionization of the atmosphere, and the storm will fall apart.
It will affect the setting up of the storm tracks, the jet stream, the location of the storms. And so you end up with an intervention on the solar side of things would pretty directly begin to affect the weather patterns. And so climate control, or attempted climate control, and weather control rely on this very large spectrum of intervention. It's also true that if you can forecast climate, you can control a lot of futures markets, and you could know if you had the best information, or if you had some leverage over what the climate system is going to turn out to be, you would be able to invest in advance in all your crop futures and your agricultural activities, and not just agriculture, but weather effects. I think it's something like 80% of the U.S. economy is weather sensitive, and so all kinds of businesses would like to see some weather edge, some advantageous information that they would have.
It's absolutely entirely possible to profit from the weather.
My name is Michael Agney. I'm an independent trader. Trading commodities at the CME Group. member of the Chicago Board of Trade and have traded derivatives and futures cash for over 15 years. Weather derivatives are financial instruments that firms would use to hedge risk concerned with adverse weather conditions. The first weather derivative was originally traded by Enron back in 1997. Weather derivatives started in 1999 at the CME Group. Big utilities, reinsurers to hedge against hurricanes or tornadoes or flooding, some sort of catastrophe, hedging against a cooler summer or a warmer winter. Let's just say I was insuring a product for $5 million, no matter what it was. Let's say if I was a utility company, a farmer, whatever it was. Let's say I had $5 million worth of crop, but I can do derivatives that are worth double that amount, and I can control the effects to where I collect on the insurance that's worth $10 million as opposed to selling the crop for $5 million. Yes, I could definitely profit from that. 2010, 2011, Southern Illinois, Missouri, those, we had a high peak of tornadoes and those types of adverse weather conditions definitely raised the price of commodities as well as drove the volatility, which also raises the price of commodities. You're going to make more money if a crop fails. You're creating insurance that's over the price of what your crop is worth, let's say. So if you can control the weather, you control how these products grow. And if you had an insight to how these products were actually seeded and what products you use to actually grow those items, corn, soybeans, and you can control that market, it's unlimited profit potential if you can control the weather.
If you want to send, cold into the Midwest, you buy up pipeline capacity, you buy up options on heating and cooling degree days, you buy derivatives off of rainfall. There are mechanisms that you can make hundreds of billions of dollars annually and defray a huge chunk of the cost of this just on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, playing with derivatives in the weather market.
Weather derivatives are basically, you're betting that there's going to be a weather disaster, and you're betting that it's going to occur within a particular time frame in a particular location, and then, the money that you put up basically is like a bet. It's like a wager, saying that this incident's going to happen here, and then when it does happen, there's a big payoff. And that big payoff is something that motivates people to continue to participate in this kind of thing and maybe even feed the very process that's causing the bad weather to happen. Particularly if there's a connection between the people that are seeding the clouds and the people that are making investments.
This is a new opportunity. It's a new tool for investors. Even if someone has no interest in, going on the offensive side and buying things, it definitely behooves them to be aware of what's going on out there. The extreme weather is here, and it's not going to reverse itself. The weather event has to be severe.
Ionospheric heating, in fact, these instruments, when they were first utilized, which is in the former Soviet Union back in the 70s, they started out then, they still call these ionospheric heaters because in one mode of operation, you can literally create above this instrument on the ground, you can heat an area up to 30 miles in diameter in the ionosphere. So you heat it up, and by heating it, it literally raises it. So then imagine this column moving up several hundred kilometers out, and then the lower atmosphere begins to rush in and fill that vacant space, that void. And as a result, you're altering pressure systems for quite a distance, which of course alters the weather. You're also able, if a jet stream is coming in the air, you're able to alter its course. And if you alter a jet stream, even a small amount, then the swing factor on the other end, you can move it so you're moving storms, say, out of the Midwest onto the East Coast, or this kind of thing, by just swinging it high in terms of its flow and getting it redirected.
Okay, so now if we look at precipitation, much has been made of this issue of damage from precipitation.
Which the particulates that these trails have introduced into the sky are, let's just say the storms can develop more violently, more quickly, in places that are not necessarily as where you would expect them to be. And so we see more flooding, we see more intense droughts, we see rainfall rates of 1 to 2.25 inches an hour that are just bizarre, and sometimes even rainfall, 1.25 inches a minute is just unheard of.
And so you have an area that's already been heated by the sun's rays, and then you have the aerosol drift in over that area, and it's reflecting both ways. It's reflecting the heat of the sun back out, but it's also trapping the heat that's already been created there by the sunlight. So it will actually create more heat and trap heat inside and closer to the atmosphere. It can actually exacerbate global warming problems.
And if you become more aware of what's happening, where the global commodities are, what extreme weather events, you're one step ahead of them.
The nature of the risk and our ability to respond to the risk is much greater in the case of the scenario that might involve large-scale regional agricultural disruption lasting a number of years.
So the agenda was drought. The agenda was to kill the storm, at least in that one particular spot.
You see a tremendous and significant loss of property and crop production. Many times this will cause farms to go out of business. And when farmers go out of business, they usually have to sell. And then if there's somebody waiting in the wings to buy their land and then turn that land over to the production of genetically modified crops, you can see where there would be kind of a strategic advantage there.
There's something that happened in the Midwest, and I'm sure everybody's heard about the flooding in the Midwest. And what happened is George Soros and his big corporate monolith went in and started buying up the farmland. So not only is it creating all these stresses, it appears to be a corporate land grab. In other words, when the farmers, the small farmers, go out of business, they're wiped out through these droughts and everything, then the big guys come in, buy up the land.
And if you think of Western history, there's a lot of it concerning water rights and even water wars. And so they were shooting about access to water to water your livestock. And now people are thinking, or at least the people who are involved in weather control sometimes think about the river of moisture above our heads. And geez, if we could just tap that. But that too is a water right that would involve access to people that felt that maybe they had prior rights over it.
You're reducing the food security of people through deploying these kinds of approaches that potentially 2 billion people could have their food disrupted by such interventions.
I've been an organic farmer my entire life. And I've been, in the last 8 years, been certified organic. And so I've been growing food in a way that feels healthy, where I have the most energy. And now it's not so healthy. I want to pass a really nice, healthy soil, rich soil, earth on to the children and have it be fertile.
My name is Joel Gil Coca. I've been farming in this land for about 5 years. Since 2007, and I'm certified organic since 2001. 10 years ago, when I started working for myself, we can grow cilantro, no problem. We can grow basil, no problem. We can grow Chinese cabbage without get trouble, or any vegetable. But 10 years after, 5 years after, that everything started declining.
Could you add something to the environment that affect a large population? The answer is absolutely yes.
I started seeing chemtrails being laid overhead more frequently and noticing the change in the crop production.
What we see in our area, anytime there's convective clouds, anytime there's a large cumulus cloud forming and beginning to rise, we hear aircraft in the vicinity, we see them actually flying over these convecting clouds, and then in a very short time, before those clouds generally will drop any precipitation, we'll see the entire cloud more or less dissolve into what looks like a massive smoke bank.
If you can control the weather, then you can control where the rain falls or where it doesn't fall. And if you can do that, then you can control whose crops survive and whose crops thrive. And if you happen to be favoring a corporation or a group of corporations that are flooding the market with genetically modified crops, you can see how manipulating The weather can actually change the market share that one or more corporations have. And there's lots of different ways that you can do it. You can do it by denying precipitation or by giving too much. You can cause, unusually large hailstones to come out of the sky and completely obliterate a crop of corn. There's lots of different ways that you can do it. Tornadoes rip up an entire town, like Joplin, Missouri, I think it was. If you look back at the tapes of those weather systems, and you look 5 days prior to that, you'll see that in those days preceding those events, there was all kinds of aerosols being sprayed all along the California coastline, where the moisture for those storms came from, where those storm systems originated. It's insidious when you think about it.
Well, Mike, I've seen since the chemtrails have come, there's a direct correlation with the way the food doesn't look as healthy and vibrant, and less of it, and that concerns me.
And of course, all crop losses are related to weather modification problems, either climate, worldwide weather, or local weather, which is called microclimates. And these microclimates definitely determine what crop grows where and in which community. And so therefore, without stable microclimates, we cannot produce as much food for the rest of the world and ourselves as when we have a more stable microclimates, not only in the United States, but in other countries as well.
We fertilize it really good and they still have a lot of trouble to produce. And I think this is not fun because we're losing a lot of money putting into this kind of production. In 2008, 2009, 3 times I lost my complete planting of Chinese cabbage.
Weather events is one of the key components to most commodities that are traded. Let's just say your agricultural group, corn, soybeans, wheat, something along those lines. Weather is by far the largest affecting factor in the price of those commodities.
If one farmer's crop fails, we have a major crop failure, say in corn, now that's going to affect every other company that uses corn in their manufacturing process. There's going to be less of it. And anytime there's less of something, that creates a price rise. Demand rises, okay, because there isn't any of it. There's only one thing. You've got 5 people that want it, so they're going to pay more money for it. The companies know that, so they're going to hike the prices up anyway.
The consumer actually sees the big brunt end of the higher costs in the commodity due to the adverse weather condition. Obviously, the consumer will pay that price.
I've noticed that the rainfall is less predictable, and then when it does rain, it does rain periods of time that's more like longer periods.
So not only do we have the pollution, not only do we have stunted growth, but we also have changes in weather. And it's been severe changes in weather all across the globe.
I don't have a clue how bad they are, but I know they are affecting already in certain plants, like basil, cilantro, and sometimes the broccoli get too much fungus. It can be from those things because no matter what we do, it doesn't fit. It's not working right.
It appears to be a fungally related ailment, and if one looks at the species extinction rate, which today is estimated to be 1,000 times natural variability, that's 1,000 times normal, a figure you'd think would alarm most reasonable people, which is 100,000% of normal, and 70 to 80% of that extinction, plant and animal, is related to fungal infection. Geoengineering particulates are known to proliferate fungal reproduction.
Abiotic stresses are drought, cold, heavy metals, excess moisture in the soil. And Monsanto has a patent that actually addresses all of those abiotic stresses. And the plants that it addresses is everything from apples to zucchini. 2011 was one of the worst years for things that create abiotic stress. They had 12 worldwide severe weather problems. This destroyed a good portion of the food supply.
Now I'm having a hard time growing cherry tomatoes outside under these conditions, And I've turned to having to build a greenhouse where I'm now growing large tomatoes, heirlooms, and they are producing really nice big tomatoes. I see that the tomatoes that I planted now are really healthy and the ones outside are dying.
The Midwest grows 40% of the world's corn, and it does have a tendency to flood. So we can expect more and more flooding. According to the statistics, the EPA statistics say that there's going to be more and more flooding.
Monsanto is one of the world's largest chemical companies. They also own 90% of the seed companies in the world right now, and they are the largest company putting out genetically modified seeds.
So what does Monsanto do? Corn is the lead-in because corn is in just about everything. Corn is the main crop. And Monsanto leads in with corn products before it does anything else. So what we have is Monsanto leading in with a drought-resistant corn and an abiotic stress-resistant corn. The drought and the flooding, it's all the same patent. Monsanto has a patent for abiotic stress. Abiotic stress is the drought, it's the flooding, it's the excess soil, it's anything that's going to stress a plant.
GMO is genetically modified organism, and it's also called GE, genetic engineering. Well, the history of farming has been a farmer will plant a seed into the ground. There will be nutrients in the ground that will enable that plant to grow. And then at the end of the growing season, they will take some of the seeds and they will save them for next year, and they'll grow their next crop. But what is going on with the genetically modified seeds is they're what's called terminator seeds. A terminator seed will not produce other seeds. With the terminator seeds, these farmers have to go back to Monsanto every single year and purchase these extremely high-priced seeds. There have been studies outside of the United States showing that genetically modified seeds, the plants that come from them, are extremely harmful to humans and other life on this planet.
When I started farming, I produced 100% my crops, but in the last 4 years, I've been declined to 50–75% if I talk into later crop, because I've been lost everything. And that's why I start moving all different crops so I can cover the loss.
Well, my food production has declined at least by 60% in the last, 10 years. I've noticed banana stalks are smaller, and certainly the tomatoes, I'm hardly getting any. I used to get bushels of tomatoes, and now I can barely get a bowl.
My concern, it can be, it's possible if we're going to run out of business if they continue doing that. They really need to stop it doing. That's all I believe, because we cannot change the system, the mother nature. We have to keep going the way it is. It's not possible.
On the other hand, heat stress is going to be one of the things, or thought to be one of the things, that might limit production of crops throughout the tropics. And so there are some questions of trade-offs of, if you think you're going to benefit many people and harm some people, how do you deal with this issue of equity, and what are the options for dealing with that?
A really interesting thing that I found is that the EPA has concluded that incidents of heat stress, drought, flooding, cold, any type of abiotic stress is on the increase. And loss due to that is going to double by 2030. Then you put yourself up as the solution. So when all of this weather comes and wipes you out, or you have a drought problem, drought, we've got the seed for you. Here's our drought-tolerant corn just for you, and it'll solve your problems. Oh, by the way, you have to sign this agreement, this 40-page agreement, so that when you go ahead and plant these seeds, you now belong to Monsanto. The weather disasters seem to be directly correlated to an increase in Monsanto sales.
So there will be the have and the have-nots. And one of the things that's being discussed under global geoengineering is which countries will be the haves and which countries will be the have-nots when that type of climate remediation is undertaken by many people at a certain level, mostly private corporations funded by the US government, they are hoping.
The fact that it's cheap isn't necessarily a good thing at all, as I'll come to in a second. The fact that it's cheap is part of the hard problem of governance. The fact that it's cheap means any small state or even conceivably individuals could do this, and that is a very dangerous thing.
There's only probably under $10 million per year, and maybe far less than that, being spent on geoengineering research. It's a mix of a handful of government grants and some private money, including support from Bill Gates.
Bill Gates invests in geoengineering. Geoengineering destroys crops. Monsanto supplies the seeds to replace those crops. Bill Gates invests in Monsanto. So Bill Gates makes a ton of money, Monsanto makes a ton of money, and the small farmer gets squashed.
Corn prices go higher because of a severe drought in this country. Where 41% of the country or the world's supply of corn comes from. So corn prices are higher, the farmer has more money, so what does he do? He buys fertilizers, which drives up the mosaic stock, or he could purchase genetically modified seeds from Monsanto.
You've got severe drought in Africa. In 2011, there was a severe drought. This is causing nothing but death. It's causing starvation, it's causing malnutrition, it's causing a severe water shortage. How do you grow anything without water? You cannot grow anything without water. So what does Monsanto do? They say, oh, we got a drought-tolerant corn for you. There's been an excessive push to get bioengineered crops into Africa. They look at severe conditions as an opportunity. They're disaster capitalists. Okay, so here you have farmers, and they've got flooding, they've got droughts, they've got everything that totally wipes them out. So what happens? Okay, if they plant it early enough in the year, they can go ahead and try and plant again. So buy more seed. Okay, buy Monsanto seed. So they're just raking up on that end of it. Okay, so if you can create enough weather manipulation, you can shorten growing seasons, you can create enough of that disaster, and you've got the seed supply, they've got to come to you.
Geoengineers have stated on the record that if global geoengineering was started, it could cause droughts in Asia and Africa. And they state that to the American public for probably obvious reasons. Why would they tell the American public that it could also cause droughts here? Why wouldn't it cause droughts here? There's nothing special about America and the geography here that would not have the same effect as Asia and Africa. If the atmosphere is filled with particulates, those particulates diminish and disperse rainfall. Period. There's too many condensation nuclei, so the water droplets do not combine and fall as rain. They simply adhere to those tiny particles and migrate further, and that's exactly what we see.
One of the suggestions about geoengineering has been that we genetically modify trees and plants. We genetically modify crops to be aluminum resistant, and this is ongoing at this time. And part of the geoengineering scheme is to say we're going to put all these chemicals and particles into our atmosphere, which is going to cause air pollution, water pollution, changes in soil pH, and could disrupt agriculture crop production to a great degree. So therefore, instead of saying that maybe this isn't a good idea that we pollute our air, water, and soils with the chemicals we're going to put into the atmosphere, which do come back down, there's a scheme abounding, which is happening right now, to modify some crops so that they are aluminum resistant to the types of chemicals and particles they're going to put into the atmosphere.
It's just going to get worse until the point where we're not going to be able to grow anything at all unless it's a Monsanto genetically modified, abiotic stress resistant seed.
The chemical companies and the and Monsanto and all of these companies are working together to make us totally dependent on their products for growing corn or growing any kind of agricultural product or trees, whatever. We're going to corporatize not only where the rainfall goes and who gets it through geoengineering and weather modification schemes, but we're also going to say that these are going to be the only crops that are going to grow in areas where we're putting in toxic chemicals that are coming down and altering the soils.
One of the most basic things about human society is that we need food and water. And these are two of the things that are most severely dependent upon good weather. Rain at the right time of the year, sunshine so crops can grow, not enough sunshine and they don't grow, too much water, the plants die, not enough water, the plants die. All of this goes back to the amount of food that's available. So if you starve people, they will be vulnerable. They will be much easier to manipulate and forced to do whatever a government wants them to do. So if you control how much food there is, or its availability, through things like the weather, or using the weather as a strategic tool militarily, you can, dramatically influence what's going on in a country. And by doing that over and over again, sequentially through a region, it's possible that you can change the political spectrum over an entire region by doing this over and over again. Maybe even, do it over a much wider region, create so much instability that you're able to, come in and say, oh, we have these wonderful fast-growing crops, genetically modified, and this, you'll have something to eat in less than 3 weeks, and I imagine that, if you can control the food supply, that you can then consolidate the financial and the political interests of a country.
Could predicting the weather enable a group or specific entity to profit from that knowledge of knowing what type of weather or weather pattern will be? Absolutely. That's what all commodities are driven by. They're driven by predicting the weather, how the weather will be in a certain location, and that directly is correlated to the price of that commodity. Absolutely. There's no doubt.
While there are a number of agendas associated with these damaging programs, one thing's for sure, they can be used to control our weather and thus corporatize every natural system on the planet. This enables certain individuals to consolidate an enormous amount of both monetary and political power into the hands of a few at the expense of every living thing on the planet.
Just by definition, the geoengineering programs are a direct assault on the most elemental aspects of nature.
What we're doing when we modify the weather is we're changing the world's climate and we're changing the microclimates, and we are doing it.
There are things we can say for certain. There's a mountain of metal raining down on us. We are certainly breathing that metal.
We have documented from the computer modeling some unintended consequences.
If such a contamination is present, shouldn't we investigate? Shouldn't local agencies investigate, which they have patently refused to do?
There's no question that large-scale climate engineering is untested and dangerous. I would disagree quite strongly that it doesn't exist. I think that the capacity to do it in engineering terms most certainly exists, and that's part of the reason we have to think seriously about how we manage that.
We are breathing a mountain of metal, and that can't be denied.
If geoengineering continues and the weather manipulation continues and genetic modification continues overtaking, we're going to lose our ability to grow good, nutritious food. We are going to lose our ability to thrive.
I personally consider this ongoing toxic dumping into our atmosphere to be, along with nuclear radiation, the most dangerous threats to our health and to our environment.
We've seen UV scales go off the charts, which are a known consequence of geoengineering, ozone destruction. We've seen rainfall patterns disrupted in ways that meteorologists don't seem to be able to explain or predict.
The challenge that all of these weathermen face, all of them, whether they're aware of it or not, sooner or later they will be aware of it. And I went through a period after the epiphany of, how did I not see this sooner? How? I mean, seriously, I'm supposed to do this for a living. How did I not see this?
We have seemed to have lost our moral fiber and our ethical compass when we talk about that we all should live within an experiment that somebody else is conducting.
If you knew or could predict the weather at any given time, in any given area, then you control the fate of mankind and what they pay for everything.
Washington is not responsive to the average person. It's responsive to commercial interests who can spend millions on campaigns now without restriction, who literally drive the policy making in Washington, D.C.
I guess I'm under the belief that you can't control the weather. You know, I hope someday we could control the weather.
Power becomes an addictive thing.
We're taking what the Creator has created, usurping His authority, and bringing it under the authority of corporations.
I'm worried that one person or one group would try to have that much leverage over the whole planet.
I don't believe that anybody has the right to play God, especially when they're putting particles and chemicals into the atmosphere, which there's unintended and consequences that are known.
We don't know it all. We cannot assume the role of creator without dire consequences.
This is not a good idea, and this is not a reason to take and do a test. The atmosphere and the earth belong to all of us. It provides the food we eat, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and no one should have the right to own it.
The biosphere is at risk from top to bottom. Though you have climate scientists calling for emergency geoengineering due to events like methane mass expulsion, which appears to be occurring in the Arctic.
It would have a significant impact on the way that we operate. Notice it also has enormous political, social, and economic implications.
And so we don't want to have some giant planetary oops, I mean capital oops, in which you have a loss of life.
It's much, much harder to actually figure out the environmental risks and effectiveness of these new methods than it is to cook them up.
They're creating an artificial environment to replace the natural environment.
Shredded ozone layer, global drought, toxified soils, poisoned populations. Don't these issues matter?
Affecting ecosystems in ways we've never been able before. The whole concept of literally playing God with the technologies we have at our fingertips today.
And however the climate changes, wouldn't we be better to let the planet react on its own instead of trying to play God?
It doesn't have any benefits to society at all. It doesn't benefit the plant, it doesn't benefit the farmer, it doesn't benefit the environment.
It's all about money, and weather is another form of commoditizing, a way the Central Command Group can commoditize another form of our life.
At least the EPA has stated that there is going to be more weather, and they're attesting it to climate change. Well, I agree. It's changing. The weather's changing. Now, the real issue is it natural or is it man-made? And if it's man-made, who's doing it? Is it the geoengineering guys?
That's what I believe as geoengineering continues, that whatever changes are happening to the planet, we will exponentially worsen those changes and poison everything in the process. And indeed, with the amount of metal falling on us, that poisoning appears to have been occurring now for quite some time.
Why are you spraying that stuff in our sky?
It's accumulating massive amounts of wealth in very few hands, and that's what they're trying to do in all aspects of these economies.
The money's not worth it. This is my future.
I encourage people to get involved in the projects they're interested in, whether it's this one or some other one.
To thrive, we need to organize locally, nationally, and globally to expose and stop this practice immediately.
Please quit free riding on our future.
But do what you can do, and I think that's really the answer for all of this, is recognize that there's a network more powerful than the internet. It's a human race. And we are connected in a way that's quite powerful. The fact is, acting on what we know to be right and true, doing something about what we care about, that we can do.
Please tell everyone you know about this.
Bring this message to community meetings, demonstrations, and other public events.
The work we're doing will provide cover for others to come out. And I'm most interested in whistleblowers.
Send this film to environmental, farm groups, media groups, ADD, Alzheimer's, asthma groups, and other organizations that would do something if they only knew.
Because we just deserve a future.
And if you control the weather, you're going to control the planet. It's that simple.
Some people address this issue in fear. Some people address it in anger. I address this in faith. Faith, believing that we collectively, as human beings, as humanity, have the power and the ability to stop these damaging programs. Make a couple of announcements, then we'll do a question and answer. The primary ingredients of these programs are showing up in thousands of times the normal amounts in blood tests and hair follicle tests. So there's a good chance that most of us have these in our system. They're very, very toxic. We covered that in the first note. Dr. Bonnie Marsh and Maui put together some advice on how to chelate, how to remove some of these toxins from your body. You can go ahead and get a hair test or a hair follicle test. So these are available on the table on the way out. And we also have DVDs for sale. We encourage everybody who purchases a DVD to make copies and hand out for free. We have critical mass actually in Maui because the number of people purchased the DVD started handing these out. We also have a YouTube version, sent it out to their email list. As a result, we have the Maui Clean Sky Ordinance. We're working with Councilmember Ellie Cochran and the Mayor's Office, which will ban chemtrail geoengineering programs above and around the county of Maui. I'm hoping to bring this to the entire Hawaiian Islands so that we have a shot at breathing clean, fresh air. And also, it also helps me, although the film has been seen by millions and millions of people, it's for free. So I live solely a very humble life on DVD sales. So it does help support my work and enables me to move forward in this, but it also helps support the vision that we have of making everyone an activist. So please, leave tonight, please do something. Before we get into the Q&A, I have a couple of very simple rules, and I'll tell you why we do this. I ask if you have a question, please raise your hand. And if you have your hand up for a long time and I don't see it, don't be shy. Jump up and say, hey man, I have had my hand up for a long time. Sometimes it's a challenge for me to keep track of that. But the other rule, and I'll explain why I have it, is if you have more than one question, raise your hand. After you ask the question, we will get back to you later. We will answer another question, eventually getting back to you. And the reason, what I learned after the first film, this film can stir up a lot of emotions, and sometimes even in denial. And those who are in denial about this, and I believe that is fear-based, want to argue, they want to control the conversation, and it really takes the focus off of empowering you, and we want to avoid that. And I really think it's fear-based. And I think that most of those people want to convince others in the crowd that this is not happening so they can go back, put their head in the sand, and not deal with the realities that we're facing. Then, without question, I have people that I believe are paid to come in and disrupt and argue with me. If you're here, for the record, we love you. We want you to come onto our side. But if you're here, we're not going to tolerate a one-sided Q&A. So, but again, join our side. It's much better, and the future is much brighter. We're going to be breathing fresh air. So those are my rules. I'd like to do a couple of questions. Yes?
One of the things that came up for me during the movie was they, or they. And how many people, like, felt so guilty that they come forward and said, hey, I've been doing this and I quit. I've seen the light and I want out of this. Here's who we are and this is where we take off from, this is where we get our stuff from, and this is what we're doing.
You broke the rule, but it's not antagonistic, so it's okay. I'll answer both of the questions. I'm just joking. Very important question. You probably are the probably several thousand persons who asked who are they. And it was interesting, after we released What in the World, everybody said, why are they doing it? Why are they doing it? You have to look into that, so we produce this. But the question that occurs on every radio show, every screening, is who are they? So I have made a commitment to move forward when I get back to Los Angeles in 10 days and start a funding trailer for who in the world or who in the hell is spraying. And we're gonna investigate that. And it's going to take a lot of resources and a lot of time, but it's something that needs to be answered, so I'm glad that you asked that. There have been a couple whistleblowers in the past. They've been on radio shows. Nobody who I would say were completely credible. They wouldn't give their full name, the rank, and everything else. However, that is one of the goals for producing the film, to get credible people to stand up and say, I have been a part of this. But if we look back to even the Manhattan Project was ongoing for over 15 years before somebody came out and started blowing the whistle. The people involved with this undoubtedly are military, many military personnel, and there are a lot of people involved with it, but they do sign non-disclosure agreements. And violating those can get very uncomfortable for them and their family. But again, it's something that we're praying for, so please, when you go home tonight, or if you look into this, please contact me, because that will be the focus. We need to name names, not only corporations, but the names of people involved. You had your hand up?
Well, surely you must know what airline, is it airlines? Like, you must know what airplane is actually coming out of it, because you can look up into the sky and see what airplane
And there is actually a phone app for the iPhone called Plane Tracker, which will tell you what planes it is. It's primarily military. We do know that a lot of the airplanes are not identifiable, and that means that they're in military airspace. Some corporations are involved. We're going to cover that again and start naming names. I have. It might be some airlines. I'm not sure about commercial. There could be some involvement, but again, before I make a definitive statement, I want to be able to back up what I'm saying. So that's going to come very soon.
Do all airplanes have that plume, whether they're filled with the aluminum chemicals or not?
No, well, when an airplane usually flies above 30,000 feet, it emits, where it's very cold and very dry, it emits a trail behind it. If you've ever been in a cold region, you can see your breath.
Right.
But never, I grew up in...
So all jets do...
Emit contrails, yeah, even, yes.
But not all airplanes have the chemicals in the trail.
No, and I'll explain. So never do you see a trail for like 2 miles behind somebody in a cold region walking down the street. And a contrail is very similar, as Sam explained, to when we breathe in cold weather. The aerosols, so the trails that do not dissipate, that turn into artificial clouds, those are being sprayed out of airplanes. There's actually a Hughes aircraft patent. It's called the well spot patent. It has been designed to spray heavy metals and the primary ingredients in geoengineering programs, which are aluminum, barium, and strontium. We're actually finding those in rain tests from around the world since we released the first film. Dr. Payne, the director of health, actually did 30 tests over on Maui. Again, all tests revealed the primary ingredients in geoengineering programs, aluminum, barium, and strontium. These match what geoengineers state they urgently want to spray in our sky, but deny that they're doing it. Again, they match a number of geoengineering patents designed to specifically spray these metals, and what we see in the sky on a regular basis, these long trails that do not dissipate and actually spread out, they turn into a canopy, is an express goal of geoengineering. So we now have an issue called global dimming. Go home and Google that. Global dimming, we now have 20% less sunlight hitting the Earth than we did just a couple of decades ago. This is catastrophic to plant life and to our health, because we need vitamin D3, which comes from the sun. One thing before we go to the next question, I think is very important. I was here 7 months ago. I just got back onto the island over on the windward side. I could not believe how many trees are dying. I could not believe. And while we're on that subject, when I first got into Maui about a month and a half ago, I went out to the Maui Times and found this article called "There She Doesn't Blow," and it explains that the trade winds here in Hawaii have declined 23% in the past couple of decades. So I did a little research. I found a Stanford study that that states that atmospheric aerosols, which are from geoengineering programs, reduce both wind and thus rain. The trade winds are needed to bring your rain here. It's not coming. The aerosols are there. That is not disputed. My concern is if we continue to see the decimation, keep your eyes open when you drive around. I would say 35% of your trees are dead. And I can assure you, it's not only due to the drought conditions, but also the heavy metal contamination, which again has been tested. You had your hand up first, then we'll continue.
Okay. Relating to the coral die-off in Hawaii, that's significant, and new diseases are being found in the corals on a regular basis. One was just announced this last week. Do you feel that there's any effect on the pH of the ocean water and or the amount of light that's not reaching the coral through the ocean?
Wow, I'm going to have you all foaming at the mouth after tonight, and I apologize for that. NOAA did a study 2 years ago on heavy metal contamination on whales. They found over 2,000% higher than the normal amounts of aluminum in whales. I wasn't even going to bring this up, but yes, geoengineering programs do change the pH of the rain. Aluminum oxide specifically raises the rain from an acidic to an alkaline, and that's one of the reasons why we're also seeing a lot of our vegetation die off, because some plant life here on the island requires an acidic soil. Geoengineering programs, again, change that pH. Another factor of geoengineering, other than stratospheric aerosol geoengineering, is what is called iron fertilization. And they are changing the composition of your ocean. They are dumping iron plumes to stimulate algae growth, stating that that will get rid of CO2 in the ocean. Who knows what the other agendas are? They are doing this. Is it related to the reef die-off? I'm not sure, but I can tell you for sure. We did some tests up in Northern California in a stream. It had 375 parts per billion of aluminum. A high test is considered 100 parts per billion aluminum. So it's just through the charts. Is anybody following? Good, good. We want all leave happy and charged. Yes, you had a question?
Yes, I'm a volunteer for the Red Cross. I run shelters during disasters. And one of the things I found strange is that we had, for instance, hail that came down in Kailua over on the east side of the island, County. And then we also had hail that just blasted through Pearl City in the middle of the island. Is that something we could more or less think that it came from these kind of...
I spoke with, I talk regularly with a lot of meteorologists. Scott Stevens came out here and we discussed the hail issue. He told me, the former weatherman, you should not get hail, period, in Hawaii. Now it's happening on a regular basis. How many people recognize that there's more lightning here on the islands? Do you know why that is?
Never used to have the lightning.
Right, because your sky now above Hawaii is a conductor. Aluminum oxide is what they're spraying. That's a very effective conductor. That is creating your lightning. In certain areas, we're getting record lightning all over the place.
Yes, with all this stuff that's being sprayed in the sky, that's coming down into our water and our soil, would you say that we as human beings are also being geoengineered?
There's no question, again, that the primary ingredients are showing up in our bodies. It's compromising our immune system, and I believe that our bodies, because we're not meant to have levels of these contaminants in our body. And I want to be frank, we covered 3 particles of aluminum, barium, and strontium. There have been others in this movement that have looked at it from a biological standpoint. Clifford Carnicom of the Carnicom Institute has found many different biological components into it. So that's something that we definitely want to look into, but it's very, very plausible. It's something that I intend to do more research on. So thank you. And you had a question that we get to?
My second question was, I was watching CNN, and they said that the air currents that were going on around the Northeast had created somewhat of an anomaly with Hurricane Sandy, because normally hurricanes shoot out to sea when they start getting up into the Northeast. But yet this took like a 90-degree left-hand turn and went back into the Northeast or New York.
Right, we're seeing all kinds of weird, strange hurricane movement. There was, what was his name? The father of weaponized weather was, I'll think of the name in a second, but there have been interviews. Weather, steering hurricanes, that technology has been researched and available since about 1960s. We've come a long way. What we noticed with Sandy, we looked at satellite, and before that 90-degree turn, there was a bunch of aerosols. Right before that, so they sprayed it, and boom, the storm steered. And what they have the ability to do, if you were aware the past couple of days, the skies were very heavy aerosol. What they have the ability to do, again, geoengineers state that aluminum oxide is highly reflective, it will block sun. and thus cool the planet. Not true, it actually warms the planet, as we covered in the film. But they have the ability, through the HARP system microwave technology, to heat that canopy up. And when the canopy heats up, boom, it creates a low pressure vacuum and enables these, I don't even know what to call them, but these entities to literally change the direction of storms. So we did study that. Mainstream, I think it was Fox or NBC in Los Angeles, covered the fact that detectable HARP signals were detected along that storm. Without question, it was manipulated. And isn't it funny that they call that storm Frankenstorm?
There's a YouTube clip that I saw that shows that.
Yeah, there's without question. I think somebody up here.
Yeah, I do. Do you have any information on where you can get organic seeds that are certified organic, other than the USDA? Because I don't trust them with their connection to Monsanto.
You don't trust the USDA now that Michael Taylor, who was the senior VP at Monsanto, now is head of USDA?
Yeah.
Wow, I thought everybody knew he had an epiphany and turned around, and that's why I was brought in. Yeah, I don't have information here, but I would recommend now's the time to get your organic seeds. My concern is that and we need to do things like this, but the plea for me is, please, when you leave tonight, please address this, please get it out into public. And my vision is what happened in Maui. When we went there to shoot the first film, I met 6 people who were aware of this. Most people thought I was crazy. Most people thought I was nuts. The entire island, I would say, I've been there for about 2 months. There was about 6 people who were unaware of it, but now know about it because we gave them films. I rarely leave the house without a DVD in my pockets. Put DVDs here, and I hand them out. And again, we have the ability to do what we're doing in Maui here, and I will come back. I will come back if you want me to. We can do some campaigns or meet with perhaps some of the political leaders, the mayor's office or even the governor's office. I think it's very important to reach out, not only in our workplace and to our neighbors to get critical mass, but also to those who are in the power structure. Who's had their hand up for a while? It might have been you.
Yeah.
And then we'll get to you.
Sorry for asking so many questions, but
I think it's great.
so there's means of production of all this stuff, and it's got to be massive. Do you have any sense of which chemical companies, industry, what part of the chemical industry is producing this stuff, and who's paying for it? Are we paying for it? Is it traceable in military budgets or other budgets? That what department would it be coming out of?
We got to talk about getting you on the staff for the next film, because those are the questions that we have. Now, we have ideas, but as somebody who has an issue that was really demonized as not credible, you know, our research is important, that we have our facts backed up, that everything is 100%. So we have our ideas, we have our areas where we're looking. When I get back, we're going to start looking for funding, because we're literally on a shoestring budget. Once we have that funding, I'm going to start knocking on doors, Michael Moore style. I'm going to start asking the questions. I'm going to go to Alcoa. I'm going to talk to employees, and we're going to find out. We are going to get to the bottom of this. But we have work to do in the meantime as well, and that's activism. I lead the Los Angeles Chemtrails Meetup Group, where we hit the streets, literally hand out several hundred DVDs in all of our outreaches. And again, that's part of the awakening. But Hawaii is a very, very important place, because you have a bunch of people packed into a very small area. So critical mass is essential. And we proved that we can do it on Maui. So now we have probably 10 times, and that's very much, 10 times the amount of people there that we can touch. And each one of us in this room, if we made it a point to hand a DVD out, a couple of DVDs out a week, and the people that saw the film did that, we can have critical mass in less than a year and a half. I believe that. You in the back, please.
Do you have any footage of the chemtrails from above?
A whole lot. Yeah.
I was flying on a plane once, and it was around the Pacific Northwest. And I noticed that there was black trails of clouds around, and one plane was actually going through and it was black, and people was like freaking out. And I was kind of trying to bring awareness to that. And so, from what I believe those were chemtrails, and there's black from above.
Could be a number of different things. Could be black carbon, which occasionally they disperse into our atmosphere for a number of different things. It melts snow. Black carbon does melt snow. But again, there are a number of different things. And it's interesting because the corporations that want to suppress this information keep on trying to put out propaganda that what we are seeing is simple contrails, and contrails, can last up to several hours, even a whole day into the sky. Well, we have pictures of red trails, we have pictures of black trails. Since when did water vapor start turning different colors? When did it? So, yes.
I have no doubt of everything you've shared with us. I also heard about the possible manipulation of the weather with Sandy. Just very simply, what benefit would somebody derive from causing that storm? Because I can make the connections everywhere else.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we're not sure, but we will find out. One agency, or should I say corporation or government, is actually registered as a legal for-profit corporation, and they're seeking power in certain areas of this. What happened after our big hurricane Katrina? What happened? FEMA came into power. FEMA gained a ton of power.
Well, they're doing
because of that. As a result, now we have this police state emerging. There are political agendas behind any disaster. People made billions of dollars predicting that storm. There are cleanup crews, there are corporations that now have contracts with the city of New York who are, again, making billions of dollars. But guess who needs more money now? Take a guess, anyone, please. Who needs more money? FEMA needs more money. They're one of the most powerful agencies. And during times of distress or economic collapse here in America, which many people believe will happen soon, they are essential in establishing the shift of power. So that's what I believe, but again, I think a lot of other things are going to surface. Good question, though. Great question. Thank you. In the far back end.
Any county or state that has the no spray ordinance? I thought I heard Santa Barbara has a no spray ordinance that we actually want.
Not yet to my knowledge, and in New York and Suffolk County, they have passed one or two stages in getting an ordinance to ban geoengineering. My greatest hope, and we're going to focus on Maui, is to use Maui as a model, because geoengineers now are calling for emergency geoengineering to start as early as 2013. So what they're trying to do is create a superpower, a global governance that would oversee or set the boundaries of every country, state, and county. This is a violation of our human rights and our Constitution here in America. So it's essential that we as counties, if we already set ordinances up which make it illegal if these particulates are detected in the air that we breathe or fall into our ground and do all the damage that they're doing, that we can put up one hell of a battle and one heck of a fight moving closer towards getting geoengineering out. And ordinances are very effective in bringing awareness to any environmental issue. I think I answered your question, but somebody else had back there, I think. Okay, you had a question, then we'll get you.
Not very smart, but I can't help but notice that whenever we have this kind of meetings, it's always a small group. How do we get, this is so important, how do we get the masses to be involved? When people are struggling on a day-to-day basis, you try to, go to Whole Foods and try to buy organic. It costs. Cheaper to go to McDonald's or whatever's on the shelf. So what I'm saying is that how do we get this group to become the majority? How do we get more people involved when I understand one thing, I understand that greed motivates people a lot. And that there seems to be a system in this country that somehow is always able to put down or to make seem small or to make seem insignificant or to make seem crazy anybody who thinks like we do. Michael Moore has come up with great things, but they play for a while, but then we just sort of, as a people, just sort of get comfortable again, or get too caught up in our daily lives, just trying to make it. So how do we change that?
Well, we're at a vital time. Again, in 2013, geoengineers want to create this global governance to monitor and make these illegal programs legal. Look around, your island is dying. The food supply is dying. People's land will be taken under the guise of Agenda 21, and they're doing it up in Northern California. They create drought situations, have a water crisis, and then they actually take land away from people. There's not one person on the human being on the earth that is not impacted by this. And I want to explain to you one thing. How many people remember the drought that we had over the summer? We just got completed producing this film, and the storyline fell right in line with what they're doing. And we had this huge drought. But I started getting phone calls and emails. People said, Michael, in California, they're not spraying anymore. I think we got the program stopped. And I said, oh, not so quick, not so quick. Let's start looking at satellites. So we started looking at satellite, and what we found was all the way from the equator up to Alaska, the entire Pacific was covered with aerosols. Very little sunshine hitting the water. How is that significant? Sunshine is required to get the proper evaporation that we need to form clouds. And then is what's explained by geoengineers, the particulates act as cloud condensation nuclei. So the water that did evaporate connected instead of with other water molecules onto this metal particulate, and it drifted. We had a very silvery sky, no visible trails, but very silvery, and even if you look when the sun goes down or even on the horizon, it's white. We don't have the blue sky that we had because the aerosols are there. So anyways, we were not having rain, created a massive drought up north, but Midwest. It was very significant because when I got there, I grew up in Chicago, so I went to see my mother when we were done with production. Complete drought, farmers were losing their land. And what we found, it was interesting because when I was there were about 3 storms which were in the forecast. So I went outside, I watched these storms develop, and it looked like rain was coming. Big thunderheads would develop, and then boom, planes would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, literally seeding the leading edge of the storm. Within a half an hour to about 35 minutes, that storm would be what meteorologists call iced out. It would completely collapse. That moisture would look like smoke. It didn't have any texture, and that moisture would drift. Now, interesting, it destroyed a lot of crops. Europe, though. What happened to Europe? It got massive flooding. Europe got the rain that we were supposed to get. So why is this significant? Well, if you look at food prices have increased because now we are in a global food crisis by 25 to 30%. I live in the inner city in Los Angeles, and a lot of my neighbors and a lot of people that I speak to and I work with, I'm an activist primarily in the inner city. I open up a couple of food banks, and so I talk to a lot of people who are economically disadvantaged, and they said, you know, food prices go up, we don't know how we're going to pay our rent. And I said, what are you going to do? And they said, well, yeah, I've been living according to the rules now, but I might start selling drugs. And honestly, I don't want to do this. I might have to keep my place. And that will lead to so many other social problems. Those are some of the impacts that we're seeing here. If we allow these programs to continue, we are looking at a lot of other issues related to hunger and starvation here in America. What is it doing in Africa? This broke my heart because I looked at the number of children that are starving as a direct result of these programs. Geoengineers state that if we start these programs, it will create droughts in Africa and Asia. During the time that we were here, how many people want to just say an estimate of how many children and people died of painful death of starvation? 2,000 since we have been together. These programs are killing people. And they're hurting your children if you have children. This is something that we can't wait. It's happening very quickly, and the proof is here now in the agriculture, in the forest. Please, about 5 minutes. We have about 5 more minutes, so I will be trying a little less winded. You had one more question, and I'll stick around for a little bit afterwards.
We have a unique situation climatically, and we've got volcanoes go up and we've got fog. How does this stuff mix with fog? We've got another thing that's really unique. We've got more Monsanto type companies here than probably any other state in the nation. It seems to me that we've got, it's counterproductive to do chemtrails here, given that we're doing genetically engineered crops, unless they're genetically engineered to not do very well with do better with less sunlight. But how does that mixture with the naturally occurring sulfur dioxide affecting things?
Well, a lot of people thought what we were seeing was fog on a regular basis, so we started doing rain tests. And again, the primary ingredients in geoengineering programs increase the pH of soil. The volcano decreases, turns it acidic. So we're seeing the exact opposite. So what most people believe is fog is not. These aerosol trails, and we look on the satellite, these aerosols are, put about 500, 200 miles outside of the Hawaiian Islands. I'm not sure what the interaction of that would be, but definitely we are getting this alkaline rain. We had over 100 times the normal amount of alkalinity in the rain test that we did just a couple of years ago on Maui. So I'm not sure what the effects and impacts would be of the mixing, but we are finding these metals all around the world. I hope I answered your question. I want to get to some people real quick. I probably have about 3 minutes. Who's had their hand up for a while?
It's a personal question.
How personal?
Well, you're an Irishman like myself, and I wonder, do you plan on running for any kind of office for EPA or doing anything? What's in your future?
Well, a number of people along my travels have said you need to run for office, and I believe that I have more influence outside of the political system, and really I feel like my goal and my calling is to motivate people like us. And the reason is, this issue, we have to take the power back. And we can't depend on celebrities only. We can't depend on political officials. We have to depend on us. And this issue will gather humanity. It will be the issue. And again, this is something that impacts each and every one of us. So a lot of frightening things are going on, but we have a great opportunity because we have the system that's been developing for literally hundreds, if not thousands of years. And we are now at a point where we cannot. The future of humanity is dependent upon us taking back our power. So I think it's a great opportunity. It is an opportunity that this generation, us in this room, have a choice. We can either allow it to happen or we can stop these programs. And when we stop, we have the ability to restore our fragile planet. We have the ability to provide clean, fresh air, clean, natural organic foods for our children. And I think that is really kind of a neat opportunity.
Yeah, I got a question. Basically, around the world, there was a lot of dead sea zones showing up. And there's one down by Mississippi. Have they been tested and checked to see if some of those chemicals are being collected in some of those dead sea zones?
In the Dead Sea zones?
Yes.
I know just about every region has detected the primary ingredients, but I would have to look more closely to be 100% accurate with that. So I would have to look at the different tests and find that out. You can go on geoengineeringwatch.org, a very comprehensive website that discusses this, and it's very credible, to get more information and see if we have that in our library right now. I think just my time up. I want to sincerely thank everybody for coming out tonight. I want to encourage you. This is not one of many issues. This is the issue. This is a battle for our future. So please, please get active. And most importantly, when you leave tonight, keep looking up.